So good morning, everyone, and I'm happy to start the second session of the conference called Reinterpretations of Ethno in Contempo, Searches, Influences, Syntheses. And I'm really excited to present the first presenter today, my dear friend Ben Lunn from St. Andrews University, United Kingdom, and his presentation is called Symphony for Marras, Towards a Northeastern Symphony. And just a quick note before giving the stage to Ben, we will have some slight adjustments to the schedule today, since we have not, since we have an opening in the schedule. The presentations of the first half will take slightly longer, and we don't have our presenter Olha Myronenko today. So, Ben, the stage is yours.
Former place of study, and I'm very excited to sort of share this particular piece with you. So yes, before I can start to describe my work, Symphony for Marras, and how I drew upon the regional history and identity, I have to give a flying description of the history of the region, particularly highlighting the cultural elements of note. Britain was historically a Celtic island, though not a unified Celtic nation or kingdom. There was a commonality of language, which is still prevalent today, and the similarities between Irish and Gaelic in Scotland, or Welsh, Cornish and Breton. The Roman conquest came and went, and though there is obviously Latin influence in place names like Manchester, London, Winchester or Rochester, due in part to the Anglo-Saxon influence, the Latin influence did not leave as much as a mark as one would have thought. After the Roman period, England became a heptarchy, namely a region ruled by 7 powers. It is at this point that we really see a long-lasting regional difference begin to take hold. The constant invasion and raiding on the east coast by Angles, Jutes, Saxons and Vikings meant kingdoms like Anglia, Kent, Bernicia and Deira were predominantly Anglo-Saxon, whereas modern-day Wales, Cornwall and western and northern Scotland remained Celtic. So the Kingdom of Northumberland consisted of the kingdoms of Bernicia and Deira, which is now modern-day northeast England, and which at its largest, the kingdom stretched all the way from West Lothian, which is in Scotland, all the way down to the River Humber. Daniel Jackson, in his book The Northumbrians, highlights how geography helped make the kingdom quite so long-lasting and vast, as the North Sea to the east and the Pennines to the west effectively locked the kingdom there and was only really conquerable from the north or the south. Though Jackson goes on to argue that we were a British equivalent of Sparta, Northumberland was not just a military powerhouse. The most notable element of this was Lindisfarne, and the monastery on Holy Island, which is off the coast near the town of Alnwick, was the focal point of what some describe as the Celtic Church. This is a slightly contested term, partly due to how it has become romanticised. However, Lindisfarne, Olha, off the west coast of Scotland, and Orkney were central in cementing an alternative Christianity which managed to marry the preceding Celtic pagan traditions and Christianity. This is particularly apparent in the Lindisfarne Gospels, whose decorations are truly exceptional. Just trying to remember what I've got on the things. Yes, always lose track of what's on my PowerPoint. Anyways, the key proponents of Lindisfarne are St. Cuthbert and the Venerable Bede. The cult of St. Cuthbert led and steered the theological work of Lindisfarne, but it was Bede who is the most prominent historian, even writing the first English language historic text and even coining the term Englishman. Alongside his historical work, he was a poet, and though not the first English language poet, he was beaten by the monk Caedmon a generation earlier. He is an example of a then developing Northumbric language. Bede's death song, which is arguably his final words, is one such example. So this is pronounced Fore theam neid fere, nenig wietit, thongs natura, thanhim thersia, te umbekene his hionige. White is geste, godes ether ifles, after death deg, deamid uether. Which, that's a wonderful translation by a poet called Richard Oliver Heslop, who's translated it into the contemporary dialect. which is, "A for the need fair yen is never mere, wise in thought than he ought, think what he can on his way to gan, what tiv his guest or good or ill mayst, after his death day, doom then may say." Though I'll touch more on modern regional dialect later, I could also spend a lot of time on the history of Northumberland of this era. However, there is a millennium to cover. Northumberland remained a strong kingdom, and after the victory of Norman the Conqueror in 1066, the Domesday Book, which was compiled in 1086, barely mentions the region due to the area being so unruly. However, there was an event called the Harrowing of the North, wherein William the Conqueror, or de Bataille, depending on your view, and his army arguably committed genocide. The campaign simply was to bring the region in line with Norman rule, and the mass slaughter is ultimately what destroyed the region's ability to remain an independent kingdom. Though the character of people takes a longer time to change, given that the harrowing of the North happened in 1069 to 1070, over a decade before the completion of the Domesday Book, and we were still unruly then. So after that particular period, the Northeast almost completely escapes from memory. And there are very few examples where we sort of are mentioned or discussed because we were not of any cultural significance, though, for example, the Manor Law's tale in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales talks about Olha, the king of Northumberland, in the story. Similarly, Daniel Jackson also highlights that the obscure accents of certain characters in the other elements of Chaucer's stories suggest other characters may have also been from the northeast. So there's still a hint of it, but nowhere near as comparable to what it was during the height of Northumberland. The next major era for the region is obviously the Industrial Revolution. The northeast gained a particular influence. Due to the geology of the region, the area is rich in coal, and it is part of a coal seam that stretches from the north of England through the Atlantic into Canada and into mining regions of the US. This has had a massive, significant influence on the whole region and how it would develop, both economically and socially. Speaking in terms of pure economics, the area produced incredible wealth, and without the massive production in coal, the British Empire would not have grown at the rate that it did, which gave the region the nickname the backbone of empire. Though if you compare the nature of the industries in the northwest, or any other region of Britain, the northeast, there is an intriguing and noticeable difference. Due to the nature of coal mining prior to nationalisation in 1945, it was effectively monopolised. This meant that in comparison to the fabric industry in Western England, which saw multiple factory owners competing against each other, the northeast had very few such figures, which effectively meant the area had a noticeably small bourgeoisie, to use a Marxist term. Socially, as previously mentioned, the geography enforced a certain remoteness. However, due to the nature of the industry, the northeast became littered with what is called pit villages, which existed solely to build a community around a particular coal pit. This further impacted on the regional accent, as it kept its own idioms and characters which lie in the middle between Saxon, Scottish and English languages and dialects. Some scholars have also pointed out that due to the sedentary nature of the population during this time, the dialects changed drastically from village to village, even to the point where you could identify which village some people lived based on one word that they use in their day-to-day speech. Today, around the River Tweed, which is by Middlesbrough, the River Tyne, which is Newcastle, the River Wear, which is my own, and then the the Tweed is Berwick, sorry, wrong direction, and the River Tees is down by Middlesbrough, all still have a variation and distinction in their accents. This linguistic character is prevalent in the songs of Tommy Armstrong, or a particularly notable song called The Blackleg Miner. And so I'll give you a little chance to sort of take this in. Anyone who's sort of read Scots before, they'll notice some similarities between it, or if you've read any of the works of Robbie Burns, you'll have some idea. But I will play the song first, and then I'll try and translate some of it for you if you still don't know what it sounds like.
O Gvintjilia, the Segel mine, across the weir the stretch a line to catch the throat and break the spine of the doughty blackleg miner. And Delaval is a terrible place, the rub wet clay in a blackleg's face, and around the heap they run a foot race to catch the blackleg miner. They'll take your tools and duds as well and hie them down the pit of hell. Down you go and fare thee well, thou doughty blackleg miner. So join the union while you may. Don't wait till you die in day, 'cause that may not be far away. Thou doughty blackleg miner.
What I particularly love about that recording is, one, you get to hear Northumberland pipes, which is the only instrument in the region that is distinctly of the region. Every other instrument that appears in folk music in the region appears everywhere else, so things like fiddles, harps, and all the various other different things. So the fact that we have our own bagpipes is something slightly different. But the other thing I quite like about this is it's nice to find a recording that is from someone in the region, whereas there is a wonderful recording by Steel Ice Band, who they're from the Midlands, and so they sing it as they normally do, but then you suddenly have people with a Midlands accent suddenly saying Divant, which is a very strange thing to sort of hear this sort of jaunt back into an accent that isn't their own. So it's nice to show everyone what it sounds slightly more genuinely. But anyways, but this excerpt from the 18th century not only gives a hint of the difference in the accent, but also shows some of the concerns of the area. In this song, the blackleg, or a scab, or someone who crosses a picket line, is hunted down by others in the community because the blackleg has betrayed them for siding with the bosses. And now it may sound extreme, however, at this particular period, the coal owners often owned the houses as well that the miners lived in. And so strike breakers would often be rewarded while their neighbours would be evicted en masse. And so it is harsh, but this is sort of the realities that people had to face in this element, which is why there's sort of this sense of get behind the union, because at the end of the day, it was not just protection in work, it was also protection in the community, which is a very core element of this region and of this sort of sentiment at the time. And to be honest, it's still very much part of certain areas of the community to this day. Though, despite there is lots of difficulties in living in such an industrial region, there was culture and there was also jollity too. L.S. Lowry, who is a British painter who is famed for his depictions of sad workers going to factory demonstrates a real cultural difference between the northwest and the northeast. So, for example, here, this is a lovely picture of ships on the River Wear. What we tend to find in Lowry's pictures of the northeast is everyone's happier, even though they're the same class of individual as people in the northwest. There's just a general difference in mood and character, which is just very lovely to see, whereas he's always painted as this, sad, lowly workers, whereas happy, jolly workers on the other side of the Pennines. And this humour is really, really noticeable, not just in Lowry, but also in the songs of Tommy Armstrong, who was nicknamed a Pitman poet. So he has some wonderful songs like Hedgehog Pie, which talks about these two men in a local village who find a hedgehog, they take it to the butcher, they make a pie, they eat the pie, and then suddenly they start growing hedgehog spines out the top of their head and it cuts through the hats. So there is that silliness. And there's also a wonderful comedian called Bobby Thompson, who is from my hometown, and so I'm going to show you a joke and I'm going to say it out loud so you have a hint of what it sounds like. And this is a joke from 1984, which is slightly culturally significant. One day I had a dream. Well, it was a nightmare, but it were good in parts. Anyways, I dreamed that Margaret Thatcher had died and she went to heaven. So what happened is she went to the bright pearly gates and St. Peter saw her and was like, "Howie Meg, down you go, down you go." And so she went to hell. A few hours later, St. Peter got a call and it was the devil. And the devil said, "Peter, we've got to do something with Meg. She's been doing here for 6 hours and already shut down half the furnaces." I'm glad the translation worked well. And so, yeah, that's a sense of the character which is still very much there, even though industrial concerns have changed and so on. This particular period, the industrial period, came to an abrupt end at the end of the 80s, and the last pit in the northeast closed in 1994. This is quite a harsh element of what life was like, because for the region there were coal pits that had been opened since the 18th century and were still working up until 1994. And so they'd been open that entire period that the region was industrialised. And the 1984 to 85 miners' strike was a significant turning point in Britain for many reasons. However, it was clear that Margaret Thatcher's intentions were always political, namely to weaken Britain's trade union movement and defeat what was the most militant trade union at the time, the National Union of Miners. As you saw from our very ancient song, there is that sort of political militancy behind them. Despite it ending in defeat, it really demonstrated the strength and solidarity and sense of community the coal mining areas of Britain had, as without it the strike would have ended months earlier. And so I'll just show a few more pictures. So this is one picture from Easington Colliery, where police are just attacking one individual miner. We've then got here in the background another incident. If memory serves me correctly, I think this is also in Easington as well, which is a pit village very close to where I'm from. And then I'll show the last one, which this is in the centre of Easington, where you see this old man who is close to retiring age, and he was obviously on the picket line because looking after everyone else. And it was an indiscriminate attack against various people in the communities, and Margaret Thatcher at the time described us as the enemy within, suggesting that we were, as coal miners and just as the communities around coal miners, we were anti-British, just simply because we were doing the jobs we were doing and wanting to defend our communities and our homes. And here's another one just showing the extent of the police brutality and just presence in these areas. This is just people's houses, and there's just so many police, and as you can see, there's just a small woman there, and then in other pictures you can just see mothers just with their small kids pushing them along and still surrounded by police. It was a particularly horrendous time. But despite all of this, everyone stayed together, and there's sort of a sense of pride. So like when the strike ended in 1985, it wasn't sort of people returning to work sad. It was all the pits were marched back by their brass bands. So there was this sense of we fought valiantly even though we lost. So there's a certain pride that comes in this particular fight. However, after the defeat, the region underwent rapid and rampant deindustrialization, which sees the region become one of the poorest areas in Europe. And when I was young, unemployment was approximately 50%, whereas prior to the 84 strike, unemployment was close to zero. And so it just shows what socially that does to a lot of people. And so the region I grew up was simply in poverty, though it didn't feel like destitution, because the sense of community was still very strong. And so there's a lot of mixed feelings about it. And so this then leads to the question of how do you then reflect a region now? What can it be? What will it be? All these other questions is really central to what I wanted to do in this particular piece. So 2 years ago, I was commissioned by Durham Brass Festival, and a little while before that had come across a lovely poem by my good friend Paul Summers, and it's a wonderful book called Union, which I'd recommend everyone get hold of because it's just fantastic. And the very opening poem is a poem called North, and the opening line being, "We are more than sharply contrasting photographs," which captures a bit of the frustration of the region with a rich history, and the closing line, "We are more than this, but not much more." Plainly, and in a heartbreaking way, shows how, despite our rich history, we have been abandoned and neglected as a region. And so I knew that had to be central to this particular piece. And so when I was commissioned, I wanted to sort of show this whole stretch of history, show the very ancient past, the slightly more recent history, which is sort of fading from memory, as well as sort of reflecting on the contemporary circumstances. And this is one of the reasons why I chose the word Marra. And this is a word that comes from the coal pits. So back in the day when you'd work down the mine, it would often be two people going at a time. And you'd be taking turns. One would dig, one would listen. Because ultimately, at any point, because it was very unsafe, the mine shaft could just fall on you. And so you're depending on your friend to listen to what's happening, to be ready to pull you out if something went wrong. Similarly, if you got injured, your friend would be the one who would drag you out. Or if worse, if there were other things happening, that you essentially depended on that person to keep you alive and look after you. And so it is a very particular and strong kind of friendship, which has sort of appeared in the region more broadly, and to this day is still used quite a lot. And so, but the significance of having a symphony for me friends just feels really lovely in that instance as well. So beyond just that sort of broader social problem and social reflection, to just have something for your friends is just quite a nice thing to do, and that's what I wanted to make this piece. So I divided it into 3 movements. The first one is Henna Gleth, which I appreciate some of my Welsh colleagues would not be happy with the way I've spelt it out, because Henna Gleth is a Cumbric word, which essentially is a predecessor of Welsh, which means Old North. But this I have used Old English typesetting, so they may be slightly annoyed that I've done that in this instance. And so this draws on a poem called Durham, and it is from the 11th century, and it is written entirely in Old English, and the poem describes a pilgrimage into Durham Cathedral, where you then see the sites of Durham and then walk into the cathedral and see the sites where the bones of St. Cuthbert, St. Bede, and the kings of Northumbria currently lay. So within this, that sort of gives a wonderful vision in sort of musically what you want to get at. So there is the plain chant, which opens the very piece. And then there's also a reflection of an ancient instrument called the carnix, which is this wonderful Celtic instrument, which is just like a big brass horn and would have like a dragon's head on it, and you just play overtones and scream, and it's sort of, much like the bagpipes, it's there to sort of scare off invaders. And so you've got just a lovely mental image of, say, like Romans going through misty countryside in Britain and suddenly seeing these dragon heads screaming at them. It's a lovely thought. And so all of these images I try to bring into this particular movement. And so I will play an excerpt for you. And another thing to note is the decoration we can see in the background. This is some of the marginalia from the Lindisfarne Gospels. Isn't it wonderful? So that opened up the first movement. The second movement, as I said, I wanted to reflect the slightly more contemporary history, but that memory of history that is disappearing. And so this is Songs Our Granddads Would Sing, which in the Queen's English is Songs Our Grandfathers Would Sing. I wanted to sort of draw on the folk traditions of the pit communities and so on, because, as mentioned, there's a wealth of songs, both directly related to working in the coal mines, there's just regional history and all these different elements, and there's lots of it to draw upon. But the problem is when you're using folk traditions, you don't want to naively paint a community in a nostalgic way that didn't really truly exist. So you don't want them to be like a tokenistic arrangement of the songs, but also you don't want to paint this picture of, oh yes, everyone was very happy when they were working in the mines, or everyone was very sad working in the mines. It's a much more complicated picture. And so within this, I sort of was drawing upon Horatiu Radulescu's piano concerto, The Quest, because he has a very interesting solution to this kind of conundrum. Because in his piano concerto, the third movement is constructed solely of Romanian folk melodies, all of them existing independently, moving at different speeds, different registers, just completely on their own. But because of the way he's able to orchestrate it and also take advantage of, say, like the overtone series and all these different elements, you can hear them all, but it's not chaos. And sort of it takes sort of that Ives manic collage and just makes it sort of a ringing, resonant collage in that way. So it's a really wonderful piece of music. And I essentially just wanted to do the same thing with my own work, and so it then also allowed me to reflect on all areas. And so that across the whole movement, we start and end with some of the more jovial songs, with the ending being the slightly more militant songs, and then in the middle, we're able to explore some of the sadder songs, because ultimately, working in the coal mines, led to a lot of death. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people died, buried alive or injured in work and all these various other different issues. And so I needed to make sure that that was reflected in the work as well. And before I play an example as well, this lovely image as well from the early 20th century shows rapper dancing, which is a regional dance, which is sword dancing. So what you can see here, this individual in the middle is holding all the swords. And so what you'd have is everyone holding these double-sided swords and dancing around each other, some doing flips and jumps over it, pulling off all these various different maneuvers. And then we have a whole costume play that ties into it as well, which I'm still working out the full narrative history of rapper dancing, but it's just a really lovely thing, just seeing this other side of tradition that exists as well, which I wasn't able to draw upon here, but wanted to have a nice little moment to show that we have fun folk dances as well as other elements. But anyways, this is an excerpt from the second movement. Aside, what I really loved about this particular concert as well is the two wonderful singers, Lottie Betstein and Grace Maria Wynn. I had to spend a lot of time teaching them to sing in the regional dialect. That was great to be a language coach showing all of these different regional things. It's funny how life evolves in that way. You never sort of imagine you're going to have to teach very prim and proper opera singers to sing like you did when you were growing up. Anyways, the last movement, this, as I mentioned, this is the drawing upon that poem by Paul Summers. And I structured this movement in a way similar to Gorecki's third symphony, the Symphony for Sorrowful Songs, where it starts off with that canonic feature where every voice comes in on essentially the same line, but it's modulated to different modes, and everyone sort of comes in at different points. And it builds to then having this middle moment, which then allows for the poem to speak, and then it carries on its way afterwards. And one, it's because it's a really sort of emotive way I sort of feel like to sort of build that, but also I wanted to make sure that in this particular movement that the words of the poem were really clear and dead center to all of it. Because even though like the last movement I just wanted to chuck everything at the wall, if you catch the words, you catch the words, if you don't, you don't, but it's showing that we're just full of life. And then similarly with using Old English, no one's going to understand it, so you can just play around with the phonetics and all this other kind of stuff. But this, I wanted to really hammer home that we are more than sharply contrasting photographs of massive ships and staiths for coal, and just allow that to speak so you can sort of feel it. And I also just, on a different aside, I remember I showed this to Richard Ayres a year ago, and he's from Cornwall, which is also another coal mining region, and he was just there sobbing, going, "This is the saddest thing I've ever heard." But so it was just quite nice that he, who has a very similar history, was connected to it. Hopefully, I won't make too many people in here cry. But anyways, here is an excerpt from the final movement. So, in the context of this conference and paper, the question of has a Northumbrian voice been found? That is, I think, the main thing I sort of wanted to try and demonstrate here. And realistically, it would be foolhardy to suggest I have. Partly because, not because I believe sort of I failed in the context of this, but more because a cultural voice doesn't appear instantly. It takes time to cultivate and to grow. And so, and much like, say, like in the development of classical music in Lithuania, even though the impact of Čiurlionis is massive and greatly important, it still took a long time for us to really go, this is what Lithuanian music sounds like. And it wasn't really until, say, Jūzelūnas, Kutavičius that we started to really feel that. Because it's how you build on it, but you need something to start it off. And that's what I feel like I kind of hope I've done. So if I've been successful in sort of generating that, the idea is then hopefully in the future there will be more composers from the region who will then start exploring this more, and ideally be the catalyst to explore this more, because as I've hopefully demonstrated, there is such a great history to draw upon, and also just something to take pride in. I'm always very fond of composers who love their home, as it were. And ultimately, I am just very excited to see what future Marras will write inspired by the region. And on that, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ben, for a fascinating talk. I've known Ben for like 10 years, and I sometimes still have a problem of understanding him, and this presentation clearly explains why. I got this idea during this presentation that when we refer to ethnic traditions, ethnic music, or even national music, we refer to a distant past as an isolated thing that we look at it. And not that we kind of forget about things that happened in the 18th or 20th century. We actively dismiss them as being not really purely ethnic. And your approach is quite different. You encompass everything as if history did not stop at some point. And that, I think, is a very fascinating thing, very fascinating approach.
Aye, and I sort of think there's Christopher Caldwell, the English philosopher, puts it really interestingly, where he sort of described this crisis in culture in the early 20th century as this notion that there is this naive nostalgia for the past. So you then had lots of artists constantly looking back going, oh, before industrialization, things were so much happier, we were in the fields free to do what we wanted, when actually, even though there weren't necessarily the horrors of industrialism around them in the distant past, there were still troubles. And so this looking for, we have to go backwards isn't necessarily the right way to do it. It's more taking what we have and moving forward with it. And so like even in County Durham, there's a motto of the regional miners, which is quite simply, the past we inherit, the future we build. And so it's quite nice to have that kind of thinking, that regardless of what's happened in the past, we can, it's up to us to sort of how we respond and move forward with it.
Are there any questions or comments? Well, then, thank you, Ben. It's been a pleasure. And our next presenter is Jan Bielak from Academy of Music in Wrocław, Poland. His presentation is called Adhan, Tarab and Songs on the Orient of Karol Szymanowski. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you very much. Hello, and I am. Let me say that I am very glad to be here. Let's start. Tunis, April 1914. The time for prayer has come. When the muezzin calls from the minaret, 32-year-old Karol Szymanowski listens attentively. This is his first encounter with the Arab world, and, as it would later turn out, his last. He's accompanied, this is young Karol Szymanowski, and he is accompanied by his friend Stefan Spies, to whose account we know the exact course of this expedition, which also included Constantine and Biskra in Algeria, as well as Palermo and Taormina in Sicily. While the course of the expedition leaves no doubt, its effects certainly do. What impact did it have on Szymanowski's music? Did it initiate the Oriental current in his work, as most researchers want? And if so, how? Let's start by establishing what we know for sure. So, firstly, between 1914 and 1918, Szymanowski composed important works on Middle Eastern themes, such as songs of Hafiz, Symphony No. 3, Song of the Night, or songs of the infatuated Muezzin. Yet, all these pieces are not based on original texts, but merely on paraphrases or stylizations. However, he was interested in Arab culture, and when he returned, he produced several books of notes in which he distinguished sections such as geography, the history of Muhammad, the Quran, language, philosophy, literature, history, poetry, but his contact with Arabic music was incidental and did not encourage him to make any studies on it. But finally, he listened to the Adhan many times, and this is the path that we will follow. The Adhan or Azan or Ezan is the call to prayer, Salat in Arabic. It is sacred to every Muslim because, on the one hand, it includes the profession of faith, Shahada, and on the other, it announces Salat. So it is linked to 2 of the 5 pillars of Islam. Adhan is what we call Muezzin singing, and this was what we heard. But it is not music from a Muslim point of view. According to the Arabs, it would be sacrilegious to introduce music into this sacred activity. That said, the Adhan is performed as a noble and dignified improvisation on a selected makam. And here is a brief explanation. Makam, literally place, position, is a traditionally established melodic pattern based on a 3 to 5 tone interval cells called eins and yins in the singular. Each makam is made up of 2 main eins divided into a lower yins and the upper yins. This is a brief introduction, and now we have to observe that the cognitive dissonance that we Europeans encounter here, the paradoxical musical non-music, is overcome by the Arabs through the concept of Tarab. One of the most mysterious terms in Arab culture. Its very name contains many different meanings. Referring to a specific state of heightened emotionality, yes, its emotion, it can mean both ecstasy and enchantment, as well as sadness and joy. So we can hear the diapason is very big. At the same time, it signifies the delight of communing with a work of art, be it a painting, a poem, or a piece of music. But most importantly, and most interestingly, the term was originally associated mainly with the recitation of poetry and the Quran. And this explains everything. The deep emotionality of Muslims led them to chant recitations in order to experience the content of the sacred text as powerfully as possible. And this need for a metaphysical experience thus pervades the Adhan and results in the 4 most important features of Arabic monodic musical thinking in it. And what are they? We'll talk about that in a minute after listening to the Adhan in the Hijaz Makam, which is performed by Mishari Rashid Alafazi from Kuwait. And I have selected this recitation for two main reasons. Firstly, the video of this specific Adhan has almost 9 million views. So we can say that it is popular and representative in some way. On the other hand, the Hijaz Makam seems to be the most characteristic of Arab music, as it is based on the Hijaz yinds, which sounds very oriental to Europeans. Ta ta ha, ta ta ha ham, ti ti ti, ta dam pa 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 tum. So we can see this minor second, tudum, then augmented second, tum tum, and then a minor second, tum tum. And I am sure that we know this from many even romantic pieces. And Szymanowski also used several times this particular motive. And I have transcribed this Adhan, which we will listen to, using notation which I have devised myself and which reflects my observations and thoughts on the practical realization of the makam. So, it's here.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على
So the first feature of this musical thinking is the passage of time. Because on the one hand, Muezzin cannot afford showy improvisations and purely vocal displays, because it would be music and so it would be haram, forbidden. But on the other hand, his recitation should not be a mere reading, and it has to have in it some sense of timing, proper sense of timing. And the result is something between singing and speech, and this is what determines the unique kind of passage of time in the Adhan. There is no meter here, and the rhythm, shaped according to the structure of the individual words, consists of a free juxtaposition of long and short notes. And that's why the silence plays a huge role, as it separates the places or segments from each other. So we can see this here. This was the basis for me to distinguish 14 sections. Each section is divided by the silence. 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 Silence is the sense factor. And this creates a special sense of musical time that is not counted off, but rather paused between two moments of silence. Silence and again. This was the first feature. The second feature, tonal centralization. And the recurring silence is the key formal reference point, but an identical role in melodics is played by the tonal center. Each segment is built around one main tone, which returns frequently and which ends the entire phrase. In the Adhan under analysis, the role of the center is played by tones C and F, so Do and Fa. These are the main tones, and they are the frame to the Yin's Hijaz. The third feature is the hierarchy of tones. And in my search for the most accurate way to divide the tones of the Adhan, I finally decided to use the classification known from novels and films. That's why I proposed the following systematization: foreground tones, background tones, and episodic tones, like in movie. The most important difference between them lies in the duration of the tone. The more important, the longer. This observation was the basis for the notation I adopted. The rhythmic values used are by no means equal, but express the importance or position of each tone in relation to the others. Foreground tones are put into whole notes and half notes. And the whole notes serve to definitively establish and confirm the tonal center. And let's observe that they always appear at the very end of the section. They are our main, our aim, and we always proceed to them. That's why they are so long. They must be very effective. On the other hand, the half notes placed slightly lower in the hierarchy mark the main tones of the Eins and the main syllables of the Adhan lyrics. Tu, tu, tum, tum, ti, 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 tim. So there's the main structure. Secondary tones are written in quarter notes and eighth notes. They are the essential building blocks of the musical action and are performed in the same recitative manner as in speech. The difference between the two is only the slight extension of the tones included in the quarter notes, which serves to slightly emphasize them and is usually due to the effect of the neighboring half notes. For episodic tones, I choose notation without beams. You can see, for example, here, here, and they serve to embellish a specific important tone. For example, often these tones are tones of yin, so I noted them with half notes. And they are ornaments and should be performed ad libitum. Their duration is very short, sometimes even close to vibrato. A trill is frequent effect, and we can observe that in this particular Adhan, the role of embellishments gradually increases. Here, look, just 3 or 4, but at the end, more and more and more and more. And here, and we have so much of them, there we can say they stop to be embellishments and start to be arabesques. And episodic tones are always melismas, unlike secondary tones which are built on individual syllables. And finally, the fourth feature, the principle of repetition. And because we have to remember that on the one hand, the muezzin has no chords, there is no harmony in our view. And secondly, muezzin is unable to create a musical narrative involving evolution because such a concept does not exist in his musical mentality. What is left for him? It's what the Adhan I have transcribed so clearly demonstrates, a masterful handling of recurring musical motifs as we understand them, which he subtly embellishes and expands. And let's see. We can see here this descending figure motif, and it often returns, and the end of sections 2, 4, and so on, and always the muezzin al-Lafazi embellishes it always in a different manner. And also from the macro formal point of view, this principle is important. Let's see. This is the beginning, and the end. And later this is different. So the first and the 13th phrase is almost the same, but the second and the last one, the 14th, are completely different. What's the reason? And the reason is in the text, because here we have Allahu Akbar, God is great, but at the end, Allahu Akbar in the first place, so the same melody, but here we have, there is no God but Allah. Different text and completely different phrase. And we can see that this principle here serves as a brace that binds the whole form together, and it is precisely it's an important role in the Adhan that creates for Europeans accustomed to a dynamic narrative development that characteristic Oriental effect of monotony. Someone might ask, of course, at this point, how can one be sure that there is similarity between the Adhan performed by Al-Lafazi, for example, and those listened to by Szymanowski? And of course, it would be completely justified doubt, because we don't have any recordings of this particular muezzin calling Tunisians to pray in the spring of 1914. However, in the case of Adhan, we are happy because it is an extraordinary sonic phenomenon. And it results from the following two features: unchangeability and universality. Because, in the Adhan, every word is sacred, and it hasn't changed since the time of Muhammad. So, also, the method of recitation has been passed down orally so the changes can't be so extensive. And besides, Muslim law strictly regulates the manner and circumstances of recitation of Adhan, and also describes a number of situations in which it may be invalid. And this means that when we're listening to an Adhan today, and regardless of the country, we are dealing with exactly the same musical phenomenon that Szymanowski encountered in Tunis 100 years ago. A phenomenon which, through the Tarab, had a strong influence on his work. And it did also almost immediately. When, in August, on the last normal train, as he put it, but because, as you know, the Great War was already underway, Szymanowski arrived in his hometown of Tymoszówka in present-day Ukraine. He devoted himself without delay to composing. Feeling a search for inspiration and not wanting to waste time, he decided to create a song cycle on the text he had already used once, on paraphrases of Hafiz poetry by Hans Bethe. And 3 years earlier, Szymanowski had experienced a deep fascination with these poems. He referred to Hafiz as a wonderful Persian whom Allah himself threw into his hands. And never mind that Bethe works actually had little in common with the original text of Shamsuddin Muhammad. Hafiz is a nickname meaning one who knows the Quran by heart. However, although the German poet wrote it in the German manner, he managed to capture the specific metaphysical sense of Hafiz poetry, where purely sensual experiences merge imperceptibly with the mystical, because the reason is the influence of Sufism, of which Hafiz was a follower. And Szymanowski found in these poems a passion and philosophical reverie so close to his own, which fitted perfectly into his idea of the Orient. So when in August 1914, with his impressions of the exotic journey fresh in his mind, he searched for a suitable subject, he returned without hesitation to his already familiar collection by Hans Bethe. And in a nutshell, Szymanowski composed 2 cycles entitled Love Songs of Hafiz, Opus 24 and Opus 26. Opus 24 was for voice and piano, and 26 for voice and orchestra. And the earlier collection is in the late Romantic spirit of Wagner and Strauss, and the later abandons it in a favor of a musical sensualism inspired by Debussy and Ravel, but does so, one might say, tentatively, gradually. Because Opus 26 is in fact stylistically very heterogeneous. It contains orchestration of 3 songs from Opus 24 and 1 old song from 1911, which still belong to the previous style, Wagnerian style, and 4 new songs already composed after his return from this exotic journey, which open a new chapter in his artistic work. And the innovations concern all the most important aspects: harmony, form, color, texture, everything which we can say is modern and not post-romantic. And Szymanowski wanted to abandon the functionality in harmony. However, he also rejected the vision of atonality because it was too modern for him. So what he would do? He did the most natural thing, the most natural way of organizing the sound material, tonal centralization, and we can achieve it in the simple way by creating the creating of tonal center by the principle of repetition. When we repeat some sound in the some period of time, it naturally grows as our center. Yet all this was not enough. With so many new compositional means already at his disposal, Szymanowski needed one more, direct inspiration. An external stimulus was needed to direct the musical innovations toward a specific goal, and that key element turned out to be Arabic music. A fascinating sequence of artistic stimulations can be traced here, culminating in Opus 26. It was most likely as follows. During his travels, Szymanowski listened to the Adhan and experienced the Tarab. Next, he encountered a new sound aesthetic, musical sensualism, because he was in Paris and in London, which enthralled him and opened up to him previously unknown compositional perspectives. Finally, he rediscovered the poems of Bedhe Hafiz, which became a poetic supplement to the impressions gained in Middle Eastern countries. All this initiated a creative process that proceeded in sort of reverse order. The poetry, through its philosophical and emotional content, gave an inner meaning to the resulting songs, which enabled the composer to use a new way of shaping harmonics, textures, and colors for a specific artistic purpose. And since the aim was to create Oriental color, as this was the character of the texts used, he referred to what he had heard and experienced when coming into contact with the art of the muezzins. So, the monophonic art, and as such, exclusively melodic. And in orientalizing love songs of Hafiz, Opus 26, Szymanowski understandably focused mainly on melodics. As a result, he invented a completely new kind of it, which clearly distinguishes the songs of 1914 from those of 1911, and also from the all songs which he had previously composed. And he said, for any doubt, without any doubt, we can describe it as Arabic, this kind of melody. This is because its essence is the juxtaposition of long, intense notes with a series of short notes, in which the former generally determine the tonal center, framed by the latter. And usually the melody is built from small motifs, which are either repeated unchanged or are subjected to variational transformations based on expanding the original cell and embellishing it with melismas, which creates a characteristic effect of improvisation, quite new in Szymanowski's work. And it produces the hierarchy of tones, this tonal centralization, and the principle of repetition becomes the main way of constructing the musical narrative. And what is the result? A distinctive kind of passage of time, much closer to the music of the Orient than that of the Occident. So we can see these four main features which we found in Adhan. But let us remember that these were the beginnings, the first discovery of a new sense of musical time, and consequently each new song contains a different kind and degree of its impact. And the culmination of these innovations we can find in the final song of the cycle, the Tomb of Hafiz. And so here is the Tomb of Hafiz. And even the beginning is innovative for Szymanowski because it starts with an extended flute solo, which is similar to the ney, Arabic kind of flute we can see here. And let us listen to this fragment of this piece. Molto espressivo, like in Adhan. And selected long notes are discretely underlined by coloristically by celesta, violins, harp. Texture is monodic, and this is monody in the Arabic style. And this is Hijaz yins. And we can, I think, sense this specific slowed down passage of time clarinet melody, also hierarchical ornamental, though metrically regular. Also violins. Now the oboe. Central tone, long note, and shorter notes. We can say that such a melodic line could be arranged by the muezzin. The essence is Arabic. Hijaz, voice, harp, I know that we would like to listen more. And I invite you to this, but as you know, the time. However, I would like to emphasize one more Arabic feature, very innovative, very original, and quite new for Szymanowski. About in the middle of this work, there is a long kind of musical silence, slightly broken by the timpani tremolo and pedal tone of bass clarinet, and which is an autonomous formal element, not just an addition, because it divides the whole piece in two, and thus it is just like the silence in Adhan, like something which creates an important structural feature. So as a result, Szymanowski achieved a very interesting kind of time lapse here. On the one hand, avoiding metrical regularity, frequent changes of meter, egoic fluctuations, but on the other, set within the framework of the bar order, not going beyond its mathematical strictness. So while it is not Oriental, it can certainly be called Orientalizing. And so this was the beginning. But the beginning of the Oriental current, its current reached the most major form in Songs of the Infatuated Muezzin, Opus 42. So we can see that even this word appears in the title. And the circumstances in which the songs were created are unique, because Szymanowski composed them to poems by his cousin, Jarosław Iwaszkiewicz, and in the future famous Polish poet and writer. But these poems Iwaszkiewicz wrote under the influence of Szymanowski's stories about his exotic travels. You see, so Iwaszkiewicz, who had no knowledge or experience of the Orient, naturally followed the same path of associations and sensations as Szymanowski. So we can say this is a most desired situation for composer, because Szymanowski loved literature, but he didn't have so much talent for writing poems as for writing music. And in this situation, he just told Iwaszkiewicz about his experiences. Iwaszkiewicz wrote it in a poetic manner, and Szymanowski thus had this poetic material to compose his songs. In this way, a completely unusual situation was created. The poet provided the composer with poems completely in line with his imagination and sensitivity, enriched, of course, by his own personality, but discreetly enough to allow independent musical adaptation. In the other words, Iwaszkiewicz provided Szymanowski with all aspects of this poetry, giving from himself only what the latter could not create himself, that is the verbal layer and the corresponding lyrical image. What was the result? That the character of the muezzin in these poems is only a pretext for talking about a strong passion, which on top of that is homosexual. In his poems, the subject addresses his beloved. The Oriental context allows for an amplification of expression containing a provocative vision of the muezzin who, instead of performing his sacred duty, calling for the for salat, indulges in forbidden affection and consciously commits blasphemy. It was this bold poetic image that so appealed to the composer because he found in it exactly what he himself associated with the Orient, the power of sensuality which places love and beauty above everything, even the fear of damnation. That's this kinship of thought and feeling between the poet and the composer meant that Szymanowski didn't have to make many changes in the texts of poems. However, he made one major intervention, the most important in the text, and this change unexpectedly conclusively proves what Szymanowski's attitude to the Orient was. So, he chose one poem of Iwaszkiewicz to be the first in the cycle about the muezzin, but Szymanowski added the phrase Allahu Akbar at the beginning and at the end of it. And this phrase, Allahu Akbar, is a takbir, an Arabic phrase translated as God is great. And it is the phrase that always opens and closes the recitation of Adhan, Allahu Akbar, and also at the end. And it constitutes the most characteristic part, easily recognizable even by non-Muslims, for example us. I think everybody heard it and can recognize it. Having listened to the Adhan on many occasions, Szymanowski undoubtedly stored this distinctive phrase in his memory and applied to it the initial four-note melismatic four-note motive. We will see this motive in a moment, identified by Alistair Whitman as the Sabayins, which, according to Andrzej Tuchowski, is the structural source of the entire song. So we can see that Szymanowski purposely used takbir, this phrase, and also the Arabic yins, which is connected with it. And why? For sure, to achieve more authentic effect, but at the same time he was not concerned with stylization, that is, with making his music as close to Arabic music as possible, because he by no means intended to abandon the European way of thinking about music and the construction of musical work. And this is where the whole problem of Szymanowski's Orientalism in music lies. It is difficult to determine where exactly the boundary between the Eastern and the Western runs. The key to solving this problem is to focus on Szymanowski's personality and spirituality. And he had his own idea of the Orient, based on his numerous readings related to the Arab world, but not authentically Arab, and his own tourist trip to the Muslim countries of North Africa. In this subjective vision, the Orient was inseparably associated with mystery, beauty, strong feelings, and sensual love, as well as mysticism. This was the influence of Sufism. For this reason, whenever these categories of experience appear in this period of his work, Szymanowski introduces Arabic elements in the musical layer, both conscious and intuitive. the latter directly linked to the aesthetics of color and embellishment that he was discovering at the time, evolving over the years and penetrating ever deeper into his compositional mindset. The songs of the infatuated muezzin is the culmination of this fascinating process. The use of the words Allah Akbar is an indication that Szymanowski remembered the Adhan he had once heard, and that this recollection was his main inspiration. And of course, and this is the reason why the first song entitled Allahu Akbar is the most Arabic song in the whole Szymanowski output, and I can even tell that this is the most Arabic piece in his whole work. But of course, again, we can just briefly discover it. So I will just mention that in the whole cycle, of course, we can find the four characteristic features of Arabic musical thinking, as I mentioned them. But even just in the first song, we can distinguish 4 stages of Szymanowski achieving an increasingly Oriental type of passage of time. And we will listen to the beginning of this piece, and even in these several bars, we will find 3 types of this musical, of this passage of time, and let's see and hear. This is the third, almost Arabic, so the piano is background, central tone, and this is hierarchical melody in Arabic manner, central tone. This is this Saba means. You can feel almost abundant of strict meter. Here is the second feature, more regular, more harmonical, but with Arabic melody, and the most important bar. Yes, and this particular bar, this one bar, is the most Arabic bar in the output of Szymanowski, and I hope that you felt it, that here the musical time is flowing independently of anything but a capricious hierarchical melody, while in the voice the intense long tones Allah collide with procession of arabesques. In the piano spreads out a wide arc-shaped passage having its origin and end in the central tone like a wind or something, a wind in the desert. In such a texture, it is impossible to maintain a constant tempo, but this is precisely what Szymanowski wanted. He wanted the voice to fall into a religious fervor on the verge of ecstasy. And this cannot be achieved with traditional metrical regularity. Allah and the piano. And this particular bar captured the kind of passage of time that every muezzin, not just the infatuated one, feels. So the Tarab, which Szymanowski must have encountered while listening to the calls of muezzins, found its musical fulfillment here. After more than 4 years, captured in more or less profound Orientalism and transformed by Szymanowski's intuition and sensitivity, it determined the character and expression of the whole cycle, in which the music of the East and West found such balanced harmony and unity. And such is the history of the Orient in the works of Karol Szymanowski. An Orient that, there is no longer the slightest doubt, has its basic and only source in the Adhan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan, for such a thorough presentation. It's really fascinating. Are there any questions or comments? a few days ago, I talked to a colleague musicologist about integrating folk material to contemporary music or even classical music, and she said that there are two ways of doing this, either directly quoting or integrating it into the texture, into material. But there is a third way. It's embracing the principle, embracing the thinking, and that's exactly what Szymanowski does.
Yes, yes, because
that's the fascinating thing about it.
Yes, yes, his intuition, because he was not an ethnomusicologist, and he didn't want to quote anything, but he even said that I created the Orient of my own. Oh. And I think that we heard it in this piece, but the most fascinating thing is that it is so close to the Adhan, to the Arabic music, which he didn't study and precisely didn't know, but he felt it. And I think this is why I use the term Tarab, this Arabic term which in some way explains this phenomenon.
And you discussed in a great detail his approach to pitches, the time flow, but what about timbre? In the orchestral piece, I really heard this kind of Oriental approach, very close to Ravel or Debussy, and I kind of agree with it. It's a kind of Western approach to Orientalism, but in the piano and soprano piece, I got a really harsh cognitive dissonance hearing a classical soprano singing Allahu Akbar. That was something I've never thought I would see.
And I must tell you that I choose this particular recording because it is not so much European as other recordings where the soprano is like in opera. And this is completely stylistically mischieved. It is wrong. So here we encounter this problem, this problem with two different cultures, musical cultures. This boundary.
So we will continue the discussion during the coffee break, and we'll start at 12. So thank you, Jan.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
hear me? Yeah. So we continue our conference and the second session, reinterpretations of Ethno and Contempo, searches, influences, synthesis. And we have the second part of this session. So we will start with the presenter, Paula Şandor, from Cluj Napoca Music Academy, Romania. And she will present her presentation, Romanian Folklore, Transfer and Reinterpretations in Transylvanian Contemporary Music, the Cluj School of Composition. So, you're welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the warm welcome here in Lithuania, and thank you for the organizing committee for the opportunity of talking about the topic that I've been addressing throughout the last year. Thank you. In a such appropriate context of principles of music composing Ethno and Contempo. I will try to highlight during the next minutes a few features of the Cluj composition school from the point of view of contemporary composers I've been studying recently. And I will start with the context. The shaping of the Romanian musical identity was accomplished through the confluence of two major trends, that of compensation, that of compensation, particularly related to the process of local recovery of cultural forms that appeared in the European art of the time and their placement in accordance to the local sensibility, and that of affirmation, consisting in the incorporation of popular art in forms of the West European classical tradition, a process that resulted in the inclusion of specific Romanian traits among contemporary artistic values. The very incompatibility between the general monodic modal nature of the inner structure of Romanian folk music and Western European musical forms of tonal functional essence proved to be a style generator, the fusion of the two opposites manifesting itself in an original manner in the work of the first representatives of the Romanian National School of Composition. Some of the determining stages in the integration of peasant folklore into Romanian cultured music happen at the initiative, daring at that time, of the Romanian composer, musicologist, and conductor Gavril Muzicescu, to elaborate original folk melodies for choir. This, in turn, gave an impulse to the collection and harmonization of traditional rural folklore by exponents such as Dumitru Georgescu-Chiriac, George Cucu, Ion Vidu, Tiberiu Bredicianu, Sabin Drăgoi, Constantin Brăiloiu, Gheorghe Breazul, with the aim of integrating it in contemporary compositions. The founding of the Romanian Society of Composers in 1920 and the establishment of the Institute of Folklore in 1949 facilitated the scientific knowledge, dissemination, and influence of the Romanian autochthonous dimension, which was strongly connected to the compositional landscape of the time. This is the context in which the composer George Enescu emerged as a personality who, by combining the cultured heritage of the 19th century, let us not forget that Enescu was trained in Western Europe, in Vienna and Paris, with the impulse of the popular substance of an ethnic rather than academic essence, was to substantially influence the attitude of later generations of composers towards the local folklore. A few stylistic considerations that can be found in Enescu's compositions and which are worth mentioning are the prevalence of the parlando rubato improvisational system, whose specific feature is the free asymmetrical rhythmic generated by melismatic melodic, originating in the ornamental cantabile style of songs and doinas. Then, the propensity towards the instrumental reciting style, especially the fiddlers, the prevalence of melody over all the other elements of language, the chromatic concept based on the general modal language, the cultivation of the rhapsodic form, and so forth. As for the writing, some procedures were organically adopted from folk melody, such as the pedal and ostinato techniques, the major-minor alternation specific to Romanian song, or the intense use of unison. In addition to Enescu's works featuring an ethnic background constituted by the projection of an imaginary folklore, placed at the confluence of specific melodic rhythmic elements with those coming from the universal repertoire, another technique intensively used by Romanian composers was that of popular quotation processing, of enhancement of the expressive features by adapting them to various genre or stylistic forms. In fact, Romanian folk essences also generated innovative techniques in the Romanian stylistic landscape of the 20th century. Thus, starting from the need to create a polyphonic writing that would correspond to the parlando rubato structure of his folk-inspired melodies, and not to the divisional rhythmic system specific to the contrapuntal technique, Enescu developed a heterophonic syntax, manifested in the general sense of the term by the oscillation between monovocal and plurivocal states, respectively the alternation between unison and multimelody, generated by overlapping of basic melody lines and their variations. The definition of heterophony as a basic syntactic category equal in importance to monody, polyphony, or homophony, bearing its origins in popular music, it's attributed to another Romanian composer, Ștefan Niculescu, who also applied it consistently within his work. Thus, unlike Pierre Boulez, who deduced heterophony from the serial music equation, the Romanian school of composition approached the phenomenon in a broad and deepened way from a modernist avant-garde position, also noticeable in other conceptions, such as spectralism based on the investigation of depth contents, namely the acoustics and the archetype dimension, the aleatorism in forms closer to the radical model or the controlled one based on improvisation, the morphogenetic music, and so on. At the same time, during the second half of the 20th century, the model system drawn from folklore evolves through the gradual acquisition of more and more distant functional spaces, moving towards the chromatic concept. Thus, in Romanian music, the chromatic total will be reached not by the hyperchromatization of major-minor, but of the diatonic modes and especially of the chromatic ones. Interestingly, the intense chromatization of the modes does not undermine, but on the contrary, enhances the national essence through sublimation. The new scientific methods of investigation, and especially the mathematical ones, also confirm their role, both as means of control and as a possibility of achieving innovative sound structures. Moreover, even though the Romanian compositional space reaches a significant stylistic diversity, the expansion of the technical and expressive sphere and the approach to the coordinates of a universal style does not cancel the affiliation of the works to the composer's mother language, the tradition showing its permanent persistent. Against this fervent artistic background, the Cluj School of Composition also developed, being figure in the space of the Academy of Music in the capital of Transylvania, around the influential figure of the composer Sigismund Toduța. A leading authority of Romanian music, the first composer to be granted the title of Doctor in Musicology following his studies at the Pontificio Istituto di Musica Sacra in Rome, and at the same time the founder of music doctoral studies in Romania, the professor and musicologist Sigismund Toduța promoted a fusion between Western European traditions and the Romanian folklore, along with a structuralist orientation achieved through reworking of the local music, namely peasant music or the Greek Catholic tradition, in a neo-Baroque manner. He promoted polyphonic genres and forms such as the madrigal, fuga, the ricercar, passacaglia, and others, based mainly on continuous variation and ostinato formulas in a flowing, uninterrupted musical development. Typical examples in this regard are the oratorio ballad Miorița for solists, mixed choir, and orchestra, which features polyphonic variations on popular melodies, the oratorio opera Meșterul Manole, a work with a generous Gothic architecture realized through contrapuntal techniques abounding in various ostinato constructions, in which Toduso also deepens the chromatic writing without, however, approaching the sphere of serialism. This structuralist orientation will be infused in most of the representatives of the Cluj School of Composition, from Vasile Herman to Dan Voiculescu, Hans Peter to Valentin Timaru or Adrian Pop. On the other side, Toduța's symphonies and sonatas are typical examples of his ability of generating imaginary folklore melodies. Cornel Țăranu was another outstanding personality of the Cluj School of Composition who studied with Sigismund Toduța in Cluj and also with Olivier Messiaen and Nadia Boulanger at the Paris Conservatoire. An enthusiast of the avant-garde trends of the 20th century in Europe, Cornel Țăranu succeeded in a highly original way their integration into the Romanian folkloric dimension. The composer's chamber music is revealing for this unique synthetic achievement. Thus, the sonata ostinato, built in a rigorous form and based on a 12-tone series, is not deprived of specifically local characteristics. Harmonization that points to heterophonic aspects, unisons, rhythmic structures inspired by folklore, and so forth. Throughout his creative activity, the composer goes through successive aleatoric serial phases without, however, losing his sensitivity for the Romanian song. The affective communion existing among the composers from the capital of Transylvania was dominated by the poetic and, in particular, the theoretical work of the philosopher Lucian Blaga, himself in a close artistic and spiritual connection with Sigismund Toduța. In Cluj musicology, there is even the concept of a Blaga-Toduța binomial, supported by the existence of numerous works based on Blaga's verses, not only by Toduța, but also by his followers. Moreover, Blaga's philosophical perspective on the constitution of style as the sum of mostly unconscious factors under the domination of the sense of space within a region or an epoch was to have an impact on the artists of Cluj, many of whom evoked in their own works the spatial vision of the corrugated infinite, also known as the Mioritic space. Miorița being a term that designates a young sheep, as well as the title of a popular ballad, highly representative for the Romanian culture. Blaga describes the Romanian spatial horizon, also in connection with a popular musical genre, the doina, a lyrical solemn chant, improvised and spontaneous, the essence of Romanian folklore, stating that by listening to a Romanian doina, it is not difficult to detect the resonance of a specific feeling of destiny. According to Blaga, the spatial horizon of the unconscious can truly acquire the role of determining factor for the stylistic structure of a culture or a spirituality, whether individual or collective, namely that of a matrix space. One of the composers from Cluj who have addressed the Miorița theme is Valentin Timaru in his oratorio Pe urmele Mioriței, on the footsteps of the Miorița, emphasizing a pastoral peculiarity through the sounds of the simantron, Romanian taragot, or cowbells. It also can be found in a less obvious but clearly represented form in the works of Adrian Pop. The Cluj cultural space, as well as the fates of many generations of composers trained at the Academy of Music in Cluj, have been impacted over the past decades by the influence of the teacher and composer Adrian Pop. Born in 1951 and initiated to the art of music by his father, Adrian Pop became a student in the composition class of the Cluj Conservatoire in 1970, after graduating from a high school with a real profile. He enjoyed the guidance of Sigismund Toduța as his last disciple, taking up in his turn his method of studying composition through a rigorous examination of the major historical styles as a crucial stage in the formation of future music creators. He also studied with the master Cornel Țăranu, with whom he experienced the revelation of modern horizons. The professional and artistic career of the composer Adrian Pop has involved, over the years, a constant activity in the management of the Cluj profile institutions as the director of Transylvania State Philharmonic, between 1991 and 1995, and rector of the Academy of Music in Cluj between 2008 and 2012. He has also coordinated important artistic and scientific events, and since 2009 he has been the director of the Cluj Modern Festival, focusing on the promotion of contemporary works from Cluj, Romania, and worldwide repertoire. The composer's oeuvre is based on two great sources of inspiration. The folkloric one, which he approaches through a solid and in-depth study during his training at the Cluj Conservatoire, and which produced to him a cultural and identity revelation, and the poetic one, the verses of Pablo Neruda, Rainer Maria Rilke, Salvatore Quasimodo, Christian Morgenstern, Tristan Tzara, Paul Celan, having found refined correspondences in Adrian Pop's choral, chamber, or vocal symphonic works. As for the folk dimension, it is enhanced both through the elaboration of folk quotations, a technique used in the case of highly successful choral, symphonic, and chamber works, and through the folk stylization, featured in pieces such as Țituri for violin and cello, which evoke already from the title an ostinato accompaniment formula specific to the folk ensembles called Tarab, consisting of a small number of fiddlers, and along with it, the atmosphere and spirit of Romanian dance in Transylvania. The first international recognition of the creative talent of composer Adrian Pop happened in the field of choral music, in works based on folkloric quotation, such as Vine hulpe di la munte, Here Comes the Fox Down from the Mountains, and some of the pieces included in the volume Colinde Laice, the secular carols. The melodic material reveals the author's fascination for the colinda, carol genre, which he depicts in a double setting in the context of his association with the Christmas celebration and in its pre-Christian phase of mythic ancestral unfolding. As for the chamber sector, besides the year of 1975, which marked the production of the work entitled Colinda Soarelui, the Carol of the Sun, Adrian Pop confesses that he found effective solutions only later, after the year of 2000. Significant in revealing Adrian Pop's ability to use Colinda quotations are his symphonic and concerto works, namely the Concerto for Cello and Orchestra, Ethos I, or Solstice, shaped by the interference of tradition with modern language techniques. In the Concerto for Cello and Orchestra, the ways of working with the folkloric quotation make intensive use of the technical and expressive potential of the leading instrument, highlighted by a complex writing of a virtuosity typical to fiddler players, while the orchestra emphasizes the inner features of the source material by providing a discourse of a developmental type, based on the continuous variation of the rhythmic and melodic parameters. The writing presents itself in various forms, from monody or accompanied monody to free imitative polyphony, simple or layered ostinato, subtle heterophonic, pointillistic or polymetric textures that reveal the resonances of the motivic components from the original melody. The refinement of the resulting modal chromatic universe resides in the fact that, although used generously in the form of leading tones or even in dissonant or cluster chords, the accidentals do not cancel the original folkloric essence, both tendencies being integrated in a masterful synthesis of tradition and modernity. Ethos I stands out for its archaic timbre effects, but also for its textural lyrizations that reveal the shapes of the Romanian corrugated plane, following the expressive intention of making the ancestral voice resonate by means of contemporary symphonic language. Although the work is based on the processing of a popular quotation, in this case a melody from the old repertoire of the Transylvanian carols, the actual statement of the folk melody does not occur until the end of the work, being, however, elaborated in advance with the help of contemporary techniques such as heterophony, spectralism, or texturality. Of great effect in evoking the Romanian ethos are the timbre effects, the specific essences of the symphonic apparatus, rendered by means of various ways of sound articulation and being complemented by interventions of instruments typical to Romanian traditional organology, as the semantron, or by peculiar effects issued by the flutes, the bassoon, the bells, or the suspended chimes. The musical discourse of the peace solstice, based on a carol with ritual resonances from the pre-Christian period, is marked by economy of means, the sound material being built on the basis of the variational process applied to initial motifs or motifs originating from the carol melody, and livened by the application of contemporary language techniques such as heterophony, polyphonic texturality, polyphonic attacks, or controlled aleatorism. The conclusions concerning the way in which the folkloric substance is currently enhanced by the Cluj school of composition reveal a generally valid trait of this community, emphasized by no other than composer Adrian Pop in a 2021 interview. What exactly does characterize the Cluj school, making it distinctive, peculiar? What is what? Undoubtedly, is variety, the fact that it would be difficult to identify in this group of composers the veins of any epigony or the replication of a unifying technical stylistic line. Or if a school would mean something like that, a certain way of doing things, taught, learned, and reproduced, then I would hardly designate the Cluj composing community as a school. We will therefore stick to this concept only by accepting that the Cluj school is a group of composers of significant value and number who were trained at the Cluj Academy of Music, a school, quite literally, also comprising those who, not being trained here, have worked consistently within this institution and established themselves through the value of their creations, possibly influencing each other more at the level of emulation than at that of imitation, thus becoming the authors of some made-in-Cluj compositions. Therefore, the emotional and cultural community to which the composers from the capital of Transylvania belong even today has not affected their ability to relate to the tradition and innovation in a highly original manner. The works produced under the mark of Ethno in Contempo provide undeniable evidence to that. I was also intending to play an excerpt from Ethos 1. I'm not sure if I still have enough time.
You have, please.
Okay. I will play the median section, which actually features a solo semantrum discourse. I find it quite interesting since its main characteristics lies in the rhythmic parameter. Also interesting within this symphonic work is the way in which Adrian Pop depicts the undulating plane I mentioned in connection to Lucian Blaga's philosophy through heterophonic and texturalistic writing. Yeah, that's actually more evident in the final segment of the work, but we will stick to this median segment that I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, for your very interesting talk. Yeah, do we have any questions from the audience? Yes.
Myronenko-Mikheishyna, it's lovely to hear Adrian Pop, and I sort of two quick questions. One is, with Lucian Braga, is there a translation of his book in English at all?
Yes, I assume yes.
Fantastic, I'll do some digging. The other one I was curious about is has there been much influence or noticeable influence from the Cluj school to composers in Bucharest, so like say Diana Rotaru, Dan Dediu and all those kind of figures? I'm so curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. We usually focus our analysis on the community stylistic language and less on the influences between the Bucharest and Cluj schools. But I think it's definitely, I think there are definitely some correspondences, as both schools are composing within the universal Romanian background. And if we consider Blaga's idea of meoritic space, undulating universe that characterizes the Romanian context culturally and also from at a physical level, we can say, or at least we can anticipate that there are some correspondences, but this brings us to new approaches, new research topics that might prove really interesting. Thank you.
I would also like to ask, as we already discussed about different ways of involving folklore elements into music, such as direct quotations or some structural principles, etc. And I saw in your slide a concept of imaginary folklore. Could you comment a little bit about this concept and how it is reflected maybe in the composers?
Yes. As for Adrian Pop, this imaginary folklore, it's actually the technique that opposes the folk quotation manner of enhancing folklore within the cultured music, Romanian music. That means using some folk specific language elements outside the melodic parameter. So mostly the composers involve organological effects, specific accompaniment types, special effects, or imitating folk instruments by the classical instruments. And it's simply composing in style without taking any quotation from an external source.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Okay, so let's move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, we will continue with the presentation online. So, shall we see? Hello, Gvantsa, do you hear me? For now, we do not hear you. Just okay.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you now perfectly.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thanks to organizers of this brilliant conference. Each time it's very interesting and important issues are discussed. And thank you also to chair session, and I will share my presentation here. Okay, only 1 minute. Okay, do you hear my presentation? Do you see my presentation?
Do you hear me?
I have to mute and unmute.
Do you hear me?
So, do you see the presentation?
Will she hear me?
Yes.
Do you hear me?
See the screen?
See and hear you perfectly.
I'm sorry. So I'm sharing the presentation, and so tell me, do you see the screen? Okay, I'm sharing. Sorry. Every time. Entire screen. Share. And do you see now? Okay. We see it here. Okay, I will start. I could not catch your words. Okay, I will start. And do you see the next screen? Okay. Do you see the next screen? Yes, okay, I will start. Sorry. So the significance of ethnicity in folk traditions in Georgian art music from its foundation has been profound. On one hand, ethnic-based music helps to preserve cultural heritage, while on the other hand, it allows Georgian music to establish a unique position within the cultural diversity of world music. This presentation will highlight the aesthetic and technical possibilities of incorporating ethnicity into 20th century Georgian music using a specific example of symphonic triptych of Sulhan Nasidze, a prominent figure of Georgian composing school, representative of 60 years. Among Georgian composers who expressed the aesthetic and philosophical aspects of ethnicity and interacted with both local and global cultural contexts in their music, Nasidze stands out as one of the foremost. Nasidze profoundly combined the unique, distinctive compositional style precisely by synthesizing elements of both ethnic and European music. His perspective on global, national, and ethnic cultures is captivating. According to the composer, every national culture enriches global civilization with its unique qualities. He noted that nationality is a constituent element of composer's individuality. Within a single universal human culture, each national culture finds its own distinctive expression. So, ethnicity plays a pivotal role in shaping Nasidze's compositional style, and it provides a sense of belonging and continuity with the past traditions of Georgia. For him, ethnic culture functions as source of inspiration, as mode of being, a sign of identity. Nasidze considered national folklore and art to be the basis of the creativity. I consider Nikopil Osmani Vazhapshavel and Georgian folk songs to be my teachers. This research will explore how elements of traditional ethnic music and the philosophical aspects of Georgian ritual are integrated, transformed, and reinterpreted in Nasidze's symphonic triptych. It will also examine why these elements were so essential to him. And the formation of Georgian art music school, the synthesis of national and European music thought, was of utmost importance for establishing the European style school of composing with expressions rooted in Georgian ethnic traditions. This blend of traditional elements and European compositional techniques created a distinctive Georgian art music tradition that honors both the ethno-based expressions of national identity and broader international forms. However, for the composers of 60s, folk roots have acquired an additional, more nuanced role. The point is, in USSR, the individuals were regarded as a mere member of communist society. They were valued not as individuals, but as part of collective socialist system under the condition of total ideologization and standardization of art. The themes and methods of expressing were unified. The musical tonal system had no alternative, and the melody of musical works had to be based either on melodic or rhythmic intonational formulas of the mass revolutionary song or folklore. Many quotations from folk were mandatory. They were used to show only academic music's close connection with ordinary Soviet citizen and their peasant origins. But when starting from 1960s, Soviet culture was given more freedom and a chance to distance itself from the directives of artistic resolutions of USSR ideology. Georgian composers, by bringing forward the deep layers of folklore, clearly express their national consciousness and overcome the gravity of Russian world. So folk music played a crucial role in these processes as a means of awakening national consciousness. The use of rhythmic, melodic, and modal system characteristics of national folklore is, for Nasidze, a means of revealing the national identity suppressed by Soviet ideology. He believed that by bringing forward its ethnic layers, Georgian composers could make Georgian music one of the most interesting tributaries of European music. What are the main markers of ethnic traditions used by Nasidze? Unlike Georgian Soviet music of 20s, 50s, which relied on direct quotes from folklore, the Georgian music of 60s, including Nasidze's works, employs rhythmic intonational complexes, modes, and melodies, drawing from a new model perspective rather than using explicit folkloric quotations. In terms of musical language, and the first symphony of the triptych, the composer mainly relies on the melosphere of Tbilisi environment, while in other two symphonies, he draws on the intonations of Georgian folklore from the mountainous regions of eastern Georgia. By the way, it's Tusheti, eastern Georgia. In melodies dominates the descending, metrically flexible melodic phrases, the minor key, improvisational and declarative type of recitative, the excessive movements in seconds, the repetition of ending notes at the end of phrases. The melodies based on downward movements is particularly interesting, symbolizing the descent of villagers from the mountain to the valley. The fact is that due to harsh climatic conditions of the mountains, the villagers temporarily moved to the valley in winter, as the living conditions were easier there. It's very interesting that this type of melodic structure in Nasidze's music has a broader context, not only folklore. These melodies with descending movements, gloomy mood, slow tempo, minor key, and declamatory improvisational style connect Nasidze's music with the themes of fate and destiny in Georgian, Russian, and European music. Composer's attention was captivating not only by elements of folk music, but first and foremost by philosophical dimensions of burial and mounting rituals of the mountainous ridges of eastern Georgia. These rituals best reveal the nation's consciousness and cosmological ideas, while simultaneously echoing universal human themes such as vanity and eternity and mysticism of death. Thanks to these universal themes, these compositions transcend narrow national borders and acquire global context. Due to subtitles of the symphonies, they are examples of programmatic symphonism, distinguished by the tendency to visualize the music and serve as an example of the application of film montage principles in music. In these symphonies, we not only listen to these human dramas, but we also watch it like film frames arranged according to the cause and effect principle. The main idea of the symphonies is related to the drama of human existence and dedicated to the themes such as decadence, mourning on the occasion of human burial. As greatest Georgian musicologist Orjonikidze noted, Nasida's hero is the archetype of a thoughtful individual who is imbued from beginning to end with contemplation of the eternal theme of life and death. First symphony of the triptych, Pirosmani, in 6 episodes, which contains elements of rhapsody, sonata, and rondo, was determined by the composer as a symphonic poem. It's dedicated to a solitary artist, isolated from society, whose inner spiritual experiences unfold against the backdrop of Tbilisi's multicultural and multi-ethnic musical environment. Pirosmani's story is full of sadness about the fate of genius, lonely artist, noted Orjonikidze. The prototype of the personified character of the symphony is Pirosmani, a Georgian painter from the late 19th to early 20th century, who died in complete loneliness and poverty, and to the shame of my nation, not even a grave remained. He is celebrated for his distinctive folk-inspired style, often described as naive or primitivist art. Pirosmani's works depicting rural and urban life are marked by simplicity. So his paintings commonly depict animals, tastes, historical figures, and landscapes. Dmitry Shevardnadze, the founder of National Art Gallery and Union of Artists in Georgia, noted about his connection with the folk roots. In my opinion, he was the only artist who gave us the whole 19th century Georgian life with a real folk narrative. So in the face of Pirosmani, generally raised the problem of confrontation between the genius artist and the society, and hinted also the fate of artists even enduring Soviet repression. The artist originated from the village and created his masterpieces after moving to Tbilisi. It's no coincidence that the drama of his life unfolds both through the intonations of mountain folklore and against the vibrant backdrop of old Tbilisi, a multicultural city where music was played by all social classes. Asian music, Karachaveli music, urban songs with guitar accompaniment, Neapolitan songs, and even arias from Italian operas, especially Verdi, were heard in Tbilisi after the opening of the first opera theater in Transcaucasia. The main characters, Pirosmani's light timbre in symphony is presented with guitar, a very popular instrument in all Tbilisi that serves as hint to Pirosmani's final living place. The artist's toxic environment is symbolized in the music by Syntheses' militaristic marching rhythm and 2 collages in the 3rd episode of the symphony, which brings the grotesque into music. First collage incorporates the march of Pechora Regiment, whose forceful entry adds a grotesque element to the music, along with waltz from Gaetano Donizetti's opera, thereby symbolizing the superficiality of the society surrounding the Pirosmani. And the 4th episode, there is a direct reference to the Soviet repressive machine, which actively pursued geniuses, hunting and capturing human beings and artists, and in many cases sending them by train either to their execution place or to exile. And the 5th episode, the imitation of train serves as another reference to this video. So I will try to okay, Okay, I will go on. In the finale, the composer uses a guitar solo to evoke Tbilisi ethnic atmosphere, alluding to Peter Osmani, who died in loneliness in this multicultural city. In the final steps of Peter Osmani, we see this loneliness. So in this symphony, he combined European, Russian, and Georgian folk, urban and village music. And the second symphony of Triptych Passione, which combines the peculiarities of oratory, symphony, and passion genres, composer seeks to draw in emotional and visual parallels between mourning and burial rituals of the mountainous regions of Georgia and the European passion genre. So, since this archaic ritual was originally performed by a men's chorus, composer revives it by incorporating a male chorus into the first and third parts of symphony. The literary basis of the bass part is drawn from the poems of Vazhov Shavel, a Georgian writer known for his pantheistic worldview and for creating unique verse form of mountain dialect. Verbal source explores themes of vanity and the natural cycle of one life replacing another. And the chorus text, the first and third parts, this text has both function of commentator and a sonorous function. To enhance the emotional atmosphere of mourning, Nasidze employs traditional elements of ethnic Eastern Georgian mountains, such as recitative style, the predominance of descending melodic movements, and the characteristic of so-called mountain modes. In this way, Nasidze conveyed mourning ritual of the mountainous region, embodying the intensity of the most painful human experience through elements of ethnic music. The idea of composition depicting of ancient folk mourning ritual with the monotonous psalmody in the chorus part presented in the form of Georgian invariant of lamento, and ostinati of the orchestra and chorus part, funeral march and catharsis, and the finale provokes allusions to the Baroque era passion genre. And the third part, so the funeral march with the sonorous effects, composer attempts to establish connection between archaic era and modernity, as the main theme of work remains ever relevant. Composer uses timbral dramaturgy to add more intensity to archaic ritual. The trombone part introduces a tragic tone to the march rhythm. The bell suggests the gathering of people for mourning, while the transformed main theme in oboe part features a catharsis in the finale. In the third symphony of the triptych, Dalai, in 4 episodes, the ethnic ritual of Dalaoba is presented. Dalaoba, that influenced by its variants found in Dagestan, Chechnya, and Ingushetia, was also Georgian mourning ritual in Tusheti, mountainous regions of Georgia. On the anniversary of a deceased person, this ritual was performed in a responsorial style of singing. The soloist Modalave, surrounded by 5 riders, was also riding on the horse of soul and was mourning in recitative style, and the people of chorus were followers of soloist. The text of the chorus refrain can be translated as follows: "Sing Dala, you riders, Dalaoba is very hard." The folk tradition of responsorial singing between the mourner and the unison chorus is symbolically reimagined by Nasidze in symphonic dramaturgy as an alteration of different orchestral groups. Composer uses the timbre of the trombone and elements of aleatoric technique, conveying gloomy image of death. In the second episode, in the strings, and in the third episode, in the entire orchestra. So in the third episode, he conveys the depletion of vital energy and the gradual cessation of human pulse. And in coda, the chromatic movements and the final E major chord symbolize the soul stepping out into the corridor with the light at the end of it. The threshold between death and life has been crossed. Through revival of this ritual, Nasidze presents a different interpretation of death. The physical death of body is seen as an opportunity to become part of the mysticism. Consequently, human driven by curiosity even sticks it out. So, what new perspectives did composer bring to Georgian music through this triptych? His interest in national rituals went beyond their ethnic features. He explored the philosophical dimensions of rituals, which encode universal human dilemmas, the antinomy of life and death, the problem of human existence and non existence. The next, Naside resisted the accelerated tempo of life in 20th century and overcame it by strengthening the meditative beginning. Moreover, the rituals that serve as the foundation of his creative and compositional ideas are characterized by chronotype distinct from the fast rhythm of modern life. It's well known that in modern consumerist world, the consumer ethos and the principles of market life do not allow us to waste the time. Time is money, and it must be also filled with something. So Nasidi, by enhancing the meditativeness in his music, conveys the slowed down time and illusion of time suspension typical for Georgian ethnic rituals. And the next, he expanded the cultural boundaries of Georgian ethnic traditions by framing them within the context of universal issues. And the next, reflections on these issues are approached from a composer's individualistic worldview, a perspective that would face repression during the ideologically orthodox Stalinist period. As commonly known, happy endings in compositions were deemed essential to align with Soviet ideals. Therefore, mourning or requiem-like expressions were subject of censorship and were forbidden in the finales. The next, he highlighted the importance of ethnic within the context of his time, incorporating it into the modern compositional framework. He once remarked, while mastering the technical apparatus created by various styles of 20th century music and adopting new compositional techniques is achievable by many composers, discovering a new world of emotions is the fate of only individuals. Nasida created immense inertia for the subsequent development of national Georgian music by juxtaposition of Georgian ethnic music traditions, European classic music traditions, Western compositional techniques, European music forms and features of some genres. He contributed to positioning Georgian music within a broader, particularly European context. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, dear Gvantsa. Can we have questions? Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay, we have a question from the audience, and the question is, how often are the symphonies of Syntheses performed nowadays, or can you tell?
Okay, so thank you for this question. It's how to say, during the Syntheses time, of course, it was premiered and performed, but we have a huge problem in nowadays Georgia that we are not popularizing the Georgian composers, and we sometimes we avoid Georgian music and perform only European music. And I think that we must add some concerts with Georgian music, and it must be tradition to perform Georgian most important symphonies annually, and also produce and also promote and make promotion for abroad performings. To say about Nasidze, some Georgian musicologists, and I am among them, think that symphonies of Nasidze are the masterships and masterpieces in Georgian music, and so I will send you the links of these symphonies, and if you listen to these symphonies from the beginning to the end, I mean the three symphonies, you will understand what I mean, that they are masterpieces, and you not only listen to this music, but you also watch it. So he's a composer with a movie mounting technique. And every time he tells the story in his symphonies, and the main issue of his symphonies are the problems of existence, non-existence, death, evil, good, eternity. So the global themes. He was interested with these issues in Soviet times. You saw the dates of the symphonies. 1977, 1978, and 9. So the end period, so 70s, we may say 70s, so 80s, and yet it was Soviet Union. And it's very interesting that before, as I told you, in Soviet music, it was forbidden to show requiem-like sections and these mourning rituals in the finale, especially. You know the reason. So this is maybe the compensation of what was not in Georgian music before. Because all the operas, for example, in 20s and 50s, 1950, 1920 and 1950, all these operas were dedicated to Stalinist and Leninist and communist ideals, and they had happy endings, and not important issues were discussed in these operas. So after the renaissance of Georgian culture started in 60s, and the generation 60 years were interested in very important and global issues and philosophical issues, and also the individualistic worldview. So um, during Soviet times, the individualistic worldview was forbidden. So Georgian composers compensate this situation, and every item, every issue, every problem is discussed in Georgian music from the individualistic position. And maybe I think that this is the main feature that we are part of European art music. Maybe with the Georgian minerals, but it's part of European music. Thank you. If my answer is if you asked me about these issues, so the huge problem, I will end with the same words. The huge problem is Georgian music. We don't perform it very often, and it's a huge problem.
Thank you. Any more questions? Okay. Could you?
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. I was thinking about a possible connection to Natala Svanidze's Pirosmani. Maybe you could elaborate on that, because if I'm not mistaken, it was composed some years prior to this Pirosmani symphony.
Yes, and Natala Svanidze is representative of unofficial music. And yes, Georgian composers are interested in. So the good question, thank you for this question, and why Georgian composers are interested in Pirosmani. Because Pirosmani is well known, and he's author of masterpieces, but it's not important in this case. So he was important for Georgian composers because Georgian composers see the archetype of loneliness of Soviet artists. Because maybe Nasidze and also Svanidze was representative, not Nasidze, but Svanidze was representative of the unofficial music, and we know that she was repressed during Soviet times, not performed, and not always discussed as a serious composer. So Pirosmani is a symbol of this loneliness, is a symbol of this, how to say, elimination from the society. When you are a great composer, I mean Svanidze, but you're eliminated from the society, nobody knows that you are genius. Yes, Svanidze was genius composer, but as she was not, how to say, not she was unofficial music, representative of unofficial music. That's why she was, how to say, a little bit not popular composer in Georgia and not significant. And the orientation on Pirosmani theme, it's not occasional. So because as I told you, Pirosmani died in loneliness, and we even do not have a grave of Pirosmani. So Pirosmani is not only artist, he's symbol of this loneliness and separating from the society.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, dear Gvantsa. We move on. Yes, and our next presenter, Sanna Iti from Finland. Her presentation is Klezmer Influences in Clarinet Concerto by Kimmo Hakola. And we will have Sanna also online. So,
thank you. Shall I start?
Yes.
Finnish composer Kimmo Hakola was born in 1958. He studied at the Sibelius Academy in Helsinki and entered the limelight at the end of the 1980s after his success at the UNESCO Composers Rostrum. In 1987, he won the Rostrum with his string quartet, and in 1991 with his piece Capriole. Hakola's music has been performed at several major music events and festivals, and portrait concerts of his works have been held, for instance, in Los Angeles and New York. Hakola's music is known for its exciting dramaturgy and imagination. Quote, "There are sudden and unexpected shifts in his musical landscape, as well as occasional surprises which act as additional dimension for raising the music as an experience to a new, unpredictable level. Connections to musicians whose art has deeply spoken to Hakola have resulted in several works which are examples of his communicative style." End of quote. The Clarinet Concerto was finished in 2001 and is one such work, inspired by the virtuosity of clarinetist Kari Kriikku. It immediately became a huge success and has been performed several times since the premiere. In what follows, I shall examine Hakola's Clarinet Concerto as an Orientalistic work, suggesting that he continued in the footsteps of 19th century Romantic artists who depicted the East by music, paintings, and literature. Hakola's Clarinet Concerto involves 4 movements instead of the traditional 3. It builds on an effective dramaturgy, and the form is characterized by clear-cut sections. The orchestration is block-like. The Oriental influence in the concerto is most apparent in its 3rd and 4th movements. The latter is entitled Kasene, a Yiddish word for wedding. Accordingly, this movement associates with the frolicking and music-making of a Jewish group of people. Hakola begins the movement with a 16-second extract of taped noises of a crowd, followed by 2 words shouted by the trumpetists and the French horn players, "Hi maestre." In Italian, this means "you've got teachers," but in somewhat twisted English, it suggests a greeting, "hello masters," or something like that. Edward Said observes in his book Orientalism that, quote, "Orientalism is premised upon exteriority, that is, on the fact that the Orientalist, poet or scholar, makes the Orient speak, describes the Orient, renders its mysteries plain for and to the West. The principal product of this exteriority is, of course, representation. My analysis of the Orientalist text therefore places emphasis on the evidence for such representations as representations, not as natural depictions of the Orient. This evidence is found just as prominently in the so-called truthful texts, histories, philological analysis, political treatises, as in the avowedly artistic text. The things to look at are style, figures of speech, setting, narrative devices, historical and social circumstances, not the correctness of the representation nor its fidelity to some great original." End of quote. Hakola's approach to Oriental soundscape is akin to the stance of the Orientalist whom Sai describes in the preceding extract. Hakola creates a representation of the Orient, transmitting his artistic impressions thereof, and does in no way try to suggest authenticity of expression. His imaginings are characteristically Western, and the Orient emerges as an exotic construct in his composition. I believe we've got some problems with the sound, at least with my machine, but let's try to continue. Let us now look at the concerto more closely. Kimmo Korhonen describes it as follows, quote, "The opening movement is dominated by the aggressive toccata-like pounding typical of a Hakola. Here, the struggle between soloist and orchestra is at its most violent. Towards the end of the movement, there is a virtuoso cadenza which begins like a classical etude but subsequently takes in other styles too. The slow movement, Hidden Songs, is a soaring, melodic and captivating piece of music. Hakola has cited the slow movement of Mozart's clarinet concerto as a remote influence. The clarinet is joined by a solo violin in singing the hidden songs of the movement's title. Towards the end, following a romantic outburst from the orchestra, a section resembling a slow rock jazz ballad emerges. Hakola has mentioned Sting in connection with this section, end of quote. The third movement is entitled Allegro Farara and is, quote, a wild and whirling oriental dance in a quirky 7/8 rhythm. Despite its authentic sound, it is pure Hakola and contains no borrowed elements. In the finale, the nuptials turn out to be quite raucous as Hakola rolls out poignant pathos and rollicking klezmer lookalikes in turn. The soloist is given scope for improvisation, end of quote. As Korhonen's description suggests, Hakola's clarinet concerto is rich with a heterogeneous set of allusions. The Mozartian influence in the second movement is suggested by the soaring and well-shaped melodic line, intersected by large jumps between different traditions and the contrasting of the solo clarinet with the orchestral accompaniment background. At the beginning of the extensive cadenza that ends the first movement, there is also a passage suggestive of Mozart. The title of the second movement, Hidden Songs, aptly illustrates its character. The final 3 minutes of the total of 11 are filled by a tonal song melody of the solo clarinet in A minor. The song's accompaniment grows into a more chromatic background structure over the course of the movement's ending, and the melodic line gets its share of dissonances. The resulting impression is that of a slow jazz ballad, whose simple start develops into a more complex expression. The main stylistic influence in the fourth movement is klezmer music. Quote, klezmer is an instrumental musical tradition of the Ashkenazi Jews of Central and Eastern Europe. The essential elements of the tradition include dance tunes, ritual melodies, and virtuosic improvisations played for listening. These would have been played at weddings and other social functions. Among those stylistic elements that are considered typically Jewish in klezmer music are those which are shared with cantorial or Hasidic vocal ornaments, including imitations of sighing or laughing. Other ornaments such as trills, grace notes, appoggiaturas, glissandos, chokes, which are a kind of bent notes of cackle-like sound, flageolets, pedal notes, mordents, slides, and typical klezmer cadences are also important to the style, end of quote. Hakola's concerto's clarinet part presents many of the characteristics of klezmer playing, such as glissandos and trills. Hakola creates an effective show starred by the solo clarinetist, making him or her play scalar progressions from the low to the high register. These scales sound oriental and are created by the prominent use of augmented seconds. Ralph P. Locke characterizes this interval as follows, quote, the melodic interval that was and is one of Western music's most unmistakable markers of Easternness, end of quote. The noise at the movement's opening that ties it seamlessly to the third movement returns in measure 129, again beginning the fast motion accompanied by hypnotic rhythms played by the tambourine and the drums. This section follows the core of the fourth movement, which is the slow adagio section that begins in measure 73 and is in G minor. The clarinet now plays a tonal melody, in its simplicity much akin to folk melodies. This melody is languishing and is restated in the high register. The sense of Jewish klezmer clarinetists playing prevails. This section counts as a typical Western representation of Oriental music. The sense of klezmer music is induced by simple and subtle means, something that emerges also due to the major contrast that this section presents as compared with the concerto's first movement, which is modernist in character and does not contain tonal elements. Hakola's concerto's fourth movement evokes the sense of Jewish wedding musically, with the crowd's noise that suggests the folks gathering, and with the playing of the virtuoso clarinetist on the scene. As observed, klezmer music has typically been played in various rituals such as weddings, and Hakola builds on that fact in his concerto. Let us now listen to the opening of the fourth movement. I shall see whether I can make it from my own computer, so bear with me for a moment. The emphasizing thread seemed obvious in the preceding extract, which involves the playing of a Jewish klezmer virtuoso. And that it registers as to the listener. If and only, often only if concordates. In Kasena, those signifiers include scalar passages that incorporate the frequent use of the augmented second, the strong rhythmic background pounding of the drum, and the imitation of a virtuoso klezmer player who improvises and creates typically nasal sounds, trills and glissandi in the high register. Locke suggests that, quote, different listeners will possess more or less familiarity with the styles of this or that region or culture, as will different composers. Thus, the distinction between relatively concrete and faithful borrowings and utterly imaginary inventions may be a real and important one to some listeners, end of quote. If we listen to an extract of real klezmer playing, we may be able to track down elements that are imaginary in Hakola's rendition. The similarities between Hakola's concerto and the piece entitled Odessa Bulgard by the klezmer group The Burning Bush include the nasal sound of the clarinet in the high register, the ornamental melody figuration, and the rolling drum rhythmics. Let's listen to the beginning of Odessa Bulgard by the group.
I'm sorry, Sana, we will play it locally here. It will be a better quality. We will play it locally here, so it will be a better quality. Okay.
Fine. Not the one that so it wasn't right. So would you like me to play it from my computer, although the sound quality is perhaps quite silent or bad? Just once more, play the Odessa Bulgard from my computer. All right, let us continue. I hope you could get some idea about the real klezmer playing from the preceding extract. Hakola's concerto's third movement is entitled Allegro Ferrara. It introduces the interplay of various groups of instruments in a manner that associates with the second movement of Béla Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra, which is called Giuoco delle Coppie, Game of Pairs. Like Bartók's setting, Allegro Ferrara features couplings of wind instruments that present a motif which is spun into long melodic chains set into intricate rhythmic patterns that consist of fast syncopation, to mention one thing. The time signature is 7/8, which induces an irregular angular progression. Pairs such as the clarinets and the trumpets, the oboes and the clarinets, as well as also the trumpets are being introduced. The movement's middle section involves the solo clarinet accompanied by the percussion, after which the takes over in 142 repetition of the main movement at the beginning of the movement. Hakolas clarinet concerto was preceding some compositions for the clarinet that seemed like preliminary sketches for it. One of these is Diamond Street, a 7-minute piece for clarinet solo that was finished 2 years before the clarinet concerto. Even earlier on, in 1995, Hakola had composed Loco for clarinet and bass drum that features his characteristic stylized Orientalism at several points. The third piece that contains exotic threads is the Clarinet Quintet, written in 1997. The third movement of the clarinet concerto prominently presents a theme that originates in Diamond Street. Its character is restlessly moving and angular. The piece presents glissandi and some ornaments in the high register, something that renders a shrill and nasal sound for the treatment, connoting the Orient for Western ears. The earliest point in Loco that features exotic influences occurs at 53 seconds after the start of the piece and continues until it has lasted 1 minute and 50 seconds. This point seems like an evocation of the thematic that became more prevalent as the piece progresses. The Oriental flavor consists of ornamental scalar passages that invoke non-Western influence due to the use of augmented intervals. The highlight of the exoticist treatment occurs starting at 13.5 minutes and continues until the end of the 20-minute piece. The lingering, slowly developing curves of the melody are imbued with nasal sounds that color the clarinet sensations. The sound world thus evokes the sense of the Middle East. Hakala's klezmer invocations could be characterized as a tribute to the compositional possibilities of the clarinet, whose player he makes improvise and urges into virtuosic displays. The composer's inventions include the blending of birdsong imitations by the solo clarinet with full orchestral texture, and the effective use of the harp and percussion instruments. I propose that Hakala's modernist Orientalism imbued by romantic undertone, something that makes his music easy to listen to. We ask, what kind of Orientalist is Kimmo Hakola, whose style implications of the exotic klezmer play lead one to asking about the composer's relationship with Jewish and Middle East cultures? Edward Said has observed its parts count very little. What matters and is decisive is what I have been calling the Orientalist vision, a vision by no means confined to the professional scholar, but rather the common possession of all who have thought about the Orient in the West. End of quote. Hakala's Orientalistic vision, with its imitations of klezmer playing, could be criticized as clicheistic, but as these imitations are mixed with other elements of his style, they become part of an innovative and modernist musical language, most apparent in the concerto's third movement. What motivates his choice of exotic approaches might be illuminated by the following comments of John M. Mackenzie. He obsessed polemically regarding pictorial arts, quote, "In fact, in looking at Orientalist painting, we require not a theory of otherness, but a theory of cross-cultural reference. Cultural cross-reference. European artists projected onto the East not only the fantasy of the West, but also renewed values and wished for freedoms." End of quote. Paula fantasizes about the Middle East in terms of festivities and celebration, and ends up presenting an image of the art of distinctive threat the act as a trait, which accommodates the composer's orientalist conceptions in an effective manner. The nature of Hakala's composition and suggests that its trends such as melodies or repetition and exotic sensuality are more indicative of a joie de vivre and of concern for globalization or search for the roots of music in the folklore of indigenous peoples. However, and stresses the imaginary fictitious nature of conceptions. Regarding this one major observation, he is, quote, "Everyone on the Orient tries to characterize the place, of course, but what is of greater interest is the extent to which the word internal structure is in some measure synonymous with a comprehensive interpretation of the Orient. Most of the time, not surprisingly, this edition is a form of romantic restructuring of the Orient, a revision of it, which restores it redemptively to the present. Every interpretation, every structure created for the Orient then is a reinterpretation, a rebuilding of it. Hakola's reinterpretation of the Orient is a powerful one and emerges in several of his works. Although the materials in the clarinet concerto are inauthentic, they are capable of invoking associations with klezmer music for the clarinet. Its role is crucial in Hakola's invocation of the East. The concerto stands out as a masterpiece whose listening is rewarding and invites the attention of a large audience. I believe it will continue to be performed often as it has plenty to offer. The concerto will most likely win new friends for Hakola's music among listeners that are customarily alienated by contemporary composition. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Sana, and sorry for the technical issues. It may happen, of course, when it's an online presentation. Do we have any questions to Sana from the audience? Maybe one quick question. I'm just interested, is this Orientalistic approach somehow popular among Finnish composers, among other composers, or is Hakola the one? Could you tell us?
Yes, Hakola is unique in this sense, and it is not all common to incorporate or Jewish influences in the contemporary music of Finland. I would say quite exceptional, really. So he has many works indeed alluded to the East since the 1990s, really, and I don't think it's common at all, and it's quite unique to him as a composer.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So we end this session. Yeah. And just before our break, I would like to invite all of you to this evening concert Ethno in Contempo at the Church of St. Casimir, where you can have an opportunity to hear music by Rimantas Janeliauskas, Mykolas Natalevičius, Vytautas Germanavičius, Marius Baranauskas, Artūras Mikoliūnas, Motekaitis and Jonas Jurkūnas. So you are very invited to this event. And yeah, see you this evening, I hope. Bye.